down, you bastard!
Ah, bugger. The legacy video is taking its sweet-ass time. I've gone so long without uploads, and I have to get something out there. Let's see... You! It's not often you get a figure that's classically bad, because the franchise has moved so far forward and has had a lot of historical lessons to draw from. You don't get a lot of ridiculous hollowness these days, because even with restricted budgets, they've become a lot better at working with what they've got. You don't get abysmal stylization, because we've had a solid 8 years of the unification era where they've experimented and found what works, as well as what doesn't. You don't get alternate modes that just completely miss the mark, because they've taken feedback to heart, and made for similes that are at least passable. Things aren't that perfect storm of shitty budgets and shitty ideas anymore. They, for the most part, tend to be pretty good. Until now. It's been a hot minute since we had a figure of this garbage tier, and honestly, it would be quite refreshing if it weren't so frustrating. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Age of the Prime's deluxe class Micronus Prime. So what the hell is this thing actually supposed to be? How do we get here? What are we dealing with? Well, as discussed as prior videos this year, the 13 primes are this year's big gimmick. And with the exception of the big f***off Optimus and Vector Prime, who was obviously conceived long before Age of the Primes was even on the table, these are all homages to many different versions of the character. For instance, Primer is a three-way homage. His body design and colors are a homage to the Covenant of Primus, the head is based on that one episode of G1, and the absolute boredom of this figure is based on the time the designer got stuck at the DMV. This approach has had mixed results. Some cases are bloody brilliant, while others have a solid base but just lack that extra flair in their deco. But until this case, I don't think I've come across an instance where it's just plain old bad. See, here's the thing. Taking inspiration here should be a dead ringer. The most prominent media appearance he's had is in Robots in Disguise, and the Covenant version is already practically in the same colors. So that should be easy, right? Just make a core class version. No biggie. Well, slight problem. Core class just kicks the bucket a year prior. I won't go into too much detail, as I'm already saving that for a future video in an upcoming Legendary Marathon, which is still happening but will probably drop in January or February due to the upcoming Legacy retrospective. But just to kind of encapsulate the issue, it relied too heavily on obscure characters instead of the fan favorites that defined small-scale Transformers a decade and a half ago. Kids don't want to buy Energon Galvatron and Beast Machine's Cheetor, as cool as those toys are. They want Bumblebee, and out of the 3 they released recently under the Generations banner, one was shit and didn't even come to Australia, and the other 2 were exclusives that were always priced slightly above what average families were willing to pay for such a small toy. So with that avenue out, as a result, he's got to go into another price point with a hefty amount of stuff. Enter the mech suit, seemingly inspired by another Align continuity relic, being the mech suit that Best Girl Miko piloted. Never understood people's problem with Miko. She was fucking badass and always a blast to watch. Either way, this seems to be loosely inspired by that, and conceptually it doesn't seem like too bad of an idea. Even the idea of having it be a deluxe and not a Voyager could hypothetically work. Sure, it wouldn't give you the wiggle room to really make this brilliant, but there's only so many Voyager slots in every year, so it makes sense that some primes have to be deluxes. Even the idea of being a parts former could work under the right circumstances. We've had great parts formers, parts formers, and even parts formers that overcome that because they don't even have to parts form anyway. There's nothing saying this toy should be bad right off the bat. The idea isn't something that's betraying it. So where does it all go wrong? Well, given this is a somewhat different case to normal, featuring armor as well as a core robot, let's just start off with the core. Micronus is very close to being passable. Not good, mind you, but definitely passable. Like right off the bat, this is absolutely RID 15 Micronus. The head is spot on the money, which is great compared to the spotty track record of previous attempts. The torso is also quite lovely, with a beautiful clear armor plate draped in pristine metallic turquoise. It's a great way to bring both versions of the character to the table, more in line with the aesthetic harmony of Solus Prime than the cromulence of Alchemist. And the rest of it is basically just a big round ball of disc shape. Much like the old RID minicons, this is just a shape folded out. And honestly, that's what it should be. It does so extremely well with its metallic paints. And even the opaque unpaintable stuff does exceptionally. He's even pretty damn clean from the back, with a lovely faux backpack featuring 2 lovely spikes. He's articulated about as well as you'd want a figure of this size to be, pulling all sorts of shapes against his other Unification era minicon release mates. And the tolerancing is pretty damn good. This has all the makings of a great inclusion. So, of course, he had to have one fatal flaw that ruined the whole thing. Now, I've always been reasonably defensive of clear plastic. In most cases, I find it's really beneficial in making parts feel both realistic and premium. Sure, there are some cases that look really awful, but more often than not, its inclusion is beneficial looks-wise. Certainly better than the Sunbow Baby Blue that makes every toy look like a toddler release. And sure, there are breakage issues if done incorrectly. And I've even suffered some breakages myself, but the key word there is incorrectly. There's places where it works real great, and places where you really shouldn't. And, oh dear, making sockets out of the stuff is a real awful idea. Right out of the box with no play whatsoever, both the knees were already cracked. And when you look at the elbows, stress marks and cracks are starting to show as well. Like, come on. Who thought this was a good idea? I thought we'd learn from this mistake back in the Power Core Combiners era. Or the Prime era if they hadn't learned their lesson by then. Are you serious? And even then, there are a few examples where clear redecos actually work alright, somehow sidestepping the cracking issues. But this isn't even after minimal use, this was right out of the box. Forget a ticking time bomb, this was already on 5 seconds to boom. I mean, for sake, not even the accessories is safe from this Yes, in keeping with the primes all coming with their own special relics, from pretty damn cool to kinda air to
the orb.
Micronus comes with the Chimera Stone, whatever that's supposed to be, and will you look at that? Stress marks out of the box too. Is this just some special type of clear plastic they're using? One that's extra brittle compared to the other shit we usually get? Don't get me wrong, this mode looks pretty damn good, especially with the big honking Armada Minicon symbol, which is a lovely callback, but what's the point if it's probably going to be mistaken for methamphetamines in a few years' time when it takes a shelf dive and shatters on the floor? And maybe that would all be fine if you could just leave it in alternate mode, but why is the head fully visible? Isn't hiding the head away like the one thing an alt mode should do? Bare minimum? When was the last time we had a figure that had visible head syndrome? Because I genuinely can't remember. I guess maybe Revenge of the Fallen Legends Jetfire comes to mind, but at least that did it in a unique way. This just displays it right in the center. It feels like there should be more room to fold down that head and make it sit flush, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't. Hey, DrLockdown from the future here. Turns out I actually mistransformed and you're supposed to just rotate the head around. I still think this is a pretty stupid idea, but at least it does make sense and I don't know how I missed it. Guess I can chalk it up to me kinda not going in with the instructions, it's just how I roll. I like finding out the transformations as I go, it's part of the enjoyment I get out of every figure. So I guess I'm gonna make mistakes like this. Devastation Prime wasn't a mistake though, and I stand by that. It broke when I did the original transformation scheme, which is why I switched to the alternative one. So aha! I really don't want to nitpick this thing because otherwise it's a pretty decent alternate mode. The paint is once again pretty nice and for the most part the detail does quite well, or it would if it lined up properly. Not sure if this is just my copy, but the front just refuses to stay tabbed together. I don't get how it's so difficult to make a robot that turns into a shape. They literally made a whole subline of this over a decade ago. This isn't even spring-loaded, so what's its excuse? It turns into nothing and it can't even do that right. Again, I really don't want to nitpick and bag on this figure unnecessarily. Looks-wise, I really don't have any complaints in either mode. It's clear that this was a design forged with passion, not laziness and compromise. But just the build quality on this thing is atrocious, completely unacceptable for a mainline Transformer, collector grade or no. And I'm not asking for this to be on the same level as the Armada fellas they've sprinkled throughout the exclusives releases, but the gap between these is just way too wide. Like, I thought Jetstorm was supposed to be the one that cracked into a billion pieces, not Micronus. If this is how they're starting to handle clear figures, I shudder to think what they'll do with Quintus, which is a real shame because I actually quite like their design and until recently was genuinely looking forward to it. Oh well, I guess it could be worse. At least this little hockey puck looks pretty snazzy, which is more than I can say for the main event. Like, I'm not going crazy, am I? This is genuinely awful, isn't it? Because for whatever reason, I keep seeing folks praise this thing simply for being original. And don't get me wrong, I love originality in this franchise, but this ain't it, chief. The official description for this, I'm assuming from Hasbro Australia, describes this as a sleek motorcycle that boasts a dynamic transformation. Why yes, I too partake in the pastime of lying. This Alternode is neither sleek, a motorcycle, or featuring a dynamic conversion. What this actually is turns out to be a wheel stapled to a chunk of kibble with the arms chilling on the back. I've criticized plenty of figures for turning into nothing, but this just takes it to a whole other level. I'll admit that the jet ski-esque windshield section looks decent enough, with some reasonable sculpting in front of the handlebars and some lovely turquoise paint. The silver is also okay, I suppose. I like that they've sculpted the dashboard, even if it's a bit simplistic. realistic. And it's a nice touch including the Mysterian logo on the seating section, tying him to the classic mini-bots in a way. Whoever sculpted this knew their shit. But then the rest, what am I even looking at? The wheel section is nice, but the chassis on the sides is just a complete mess of scrap metal. It tries to fold up, but fails miserably. They don't even peg in properly half the time due to the mechanism beneath them being very finicky. And said mechanism occasionally doesn't even line up properly, locking the wheel in place. I get it's a pretty unique parts formation scheme, but there had to be a cleaner way to do this. Then you get to the arms at the back trying to act as exhaust pipes and failing miserably. Maybe if they folded down or rotated backwards, but no, they just chill here. And the worst part, he doesn't even remain upright. Yes, this is probably the Transformers' first case of a unicycle alternate mode, and it is not doing things well. You can just leave the pipes down to support it, but then it looks even more stupid. And all of this would be fine if you had a display port circumventing the whole issue. So, of course, this mode doesn't come with one. God damn it. Yes, it's an idea that hasn't been done before, but I feel that designation of original is a little deceptive here. The unicycle mode sits uncomfortably between transformation and parts formation, a necessity of the way the legs shift, sure, but they don't really properly commit to either. I look back to the alternate modes of previous parts formers, and even in the worst cases, they at least turned into something. This here just feels like they had the parts, threw them together, and called it a day. I don't mind parts formers, I used to hate them, but I remember getting brunt and being utterly blown away by how creative all the parts usage was. Bits danced around the alt mode in crazy ways that would never be possible, leading to a killer artillery vehicle. Sure, it was taking two ideas and smushing them together, but it was the textbook example of a brilliant parts former. This here is the opposite of that. The only part pulling its weight is the legs becoming the wheels. The rest is just lazy parts folding up minimally. They couldn't even be bothered doing anything interesting with the arms. If they're only going to move 3 centimeters, they might as well transform normally or be left as is. And it's not like the bits themselves become anything interesting. With previous cases, you get massive things like big f***off cannons or really cool chainsaws. But here they just do nothing. The arms are just arms, barely masquerading as guns, the wheel is a wheel, and what do you expect to do with the chassis? It's like 6-gun all over again. That would be fine if it had an all-inclusive conversion, but this just doesn't. So it parts forms very poorly and the bits don't even do anything. What's the bloody point of the whole thing? I'm all for originality, but this is simply there because they couldn't think of anything else. This release comes to us from the mind of Takashi Kunihiro, and it just doesn't feel up to the caliber as many of his other releases. It feels like when faced with the unscalable wall of making this thing work, he just gave up and made something that barely counts as an alt mode. Caught between not quite transforming properly and not embracing its parts forming roots fully, it just ends up a mode I never want to use. The mechanical detail is either blatantly something else, scrappy as or so lacking that it doesn't work on the rest of it. This might just be one of the worst alternate modes I've seen in generations in a very long time. The closest I can think of is the Earthrise Quintesson Judge releases, who suffered from similar issues. I can't even call it a space thing because there's even been space things that have done this concept infinitely better, and at least those give the illusion that someone could drive them. This one actually has driving capability, but the final stale cherry on top of the cake of apathy is that it looks ridiculous. The peg at the back does nothing, the arms contort super weirdly, and the feet don't even tab in properly. Everything this mode could possibly get wrong is gotten wrong, and that's incredibly frustrating. I don't like shitting on alt modes because I know the designers have to balance a lot of elements to make them work properly. But this, I've just ran out of excuses. I have nothing left to say, except try harder. This conversion honestly sucks. There's a few decent ideas. I'm not going to say good ideas, but there are some decent ones, but none of them really pan out. Everything is just always so frustrating and never works quite the way you'd want it to. Now, just for simplicity, I'm going to have Micronus in his disc mode because that's how he fits into the chassis. Of course, the first thing you want to do is remove the arms like so. You then take these bits and untab them from the sides here. That will allow you to untab the wheel holders and pull out the wheel there, and we'll set this off to the side because we might as well start off with the feet. The feet are reasonably good. They're very clever and almost fun, but there's this little thing that gets in the way. You want to just shimmy these out to the side so that you can start bringing it all together, but you'll notice that this side doesn't really go because there's this weird peg here so that you can peg it onto other bots, which, yeah, I get it, but it's a wheel. Why would you do that? Once that's done, you bring these parts out to the side, rotate these hinges like so, and that will allow you to bring the legs all the way out. And of course, bring that peg out of the way if you really would want to. Now, understanding that this is going to be facing upwards like this, you need to make sure that these parts of the legs are facing forward with the least amount of pin visible. So make sure that the curve goes upwards around the back there. Don't know why it pegs on like that, but that's how it is. Anywho, then what you want to do is bring up the feet and click them into place. They are on double hinges and they lock in place like that. Works okay, and it could be really satisfying, but again, that peg there kind of ruins it. Honestly, if I was more invested in this figure, I would just leave that peg off because it is on a friction joint. So you can yoink that off if you want to, but personally I won't bother just because I don't like this figure enough anyway. And I will eventually be moving this on and selling it on the evil bay. So whatever, I don't want to cause any more damages than it already has out of the box. Anywho, what you want to do is bring these together just a little bit, giving them enough clearance to come around the back because there's an extra hinge here that will bring them all the way up. Then you bring them all the way up and bring this back. So they should be out of the way like that. You then take these panels and rotate them down, and that's just about ready to form everything else. You got 2 tabs there and 2 slots here, and it all comes together like so, in a very annoying way because there's no waist swivel now. Bring up the head like so, and then on Micronus himself, you'll notice that the way the 5mm port works also acts as a peg, which will slot into there. So he will go nice and solidly into there. It's a little bit finicky and could be way more satisfying. You then collapse these like so, locking it all into place. You'll notice these keep getting in the way as well. And last but not least, you rotate the fists into the right configuration, just like so, and then peg the arms on. Whoop-de-doo. Nice and simple. So yeah, it's not the most difficult transformation ever, but it is just not fun. Nothing is satisfying. The one satisfying part, though, the part that could be satisfying, is the legs, but even then, they've got that damn peg there. The chest never quite clicks together, the parts forming is not interesting in any way, and even if it was a full conversion, it wouldn't be interesting on its own. It's just a textbook bad transformation. I don't really know how else to describe it. Yet another thing to be frustrated about with this figure. Who could have guessed? It's been a while since I've come across a figure that was just plain ugly. There's been figures with weird head sculpts or aesthetics I haven't jived with, or kibble that's a bit shit, but completely and utterly gross in pretty much all aspects. No, this is a rare sight to behold, and I'm really not glad I'm beholding it. The head sculpt is just a whole pile of nothing. I get that mech suits don't particularly have sentience like Cybertronians do, but this just has nothing. The visor sits firmly in the middle of being angled and being rounded, so it doesn't have an identity of its own. The faceplate does nothing, even the sculpted crown just looks truncated. Maybe this would look better if it had more paint, but outside of the silver on the visor, there's just nothing. In fact, there's barely any paint on this mode overall. Silver on the shoulder greebles, which happens to be messy as shit. Silver on the aforementioned visor, silver on the belt. That's it. Aside from the turquoise from the other parts bleeding through, there's nothing here. That could work on a really vibrant color scheme, but with grayish blue, extremely dark green, and pitch black, there's no visual interest. I gotta ask, what's with the primes having really boring color schemes? With the exception of Solus Prime, as well as the 3 figures that take direct inspiration from previous counterparts, the rest of the route of the moments have all been really muted with not a lot going for them. Like, really? Practically deities of the franchise, and you can't give them something distinct? I swear to God, if they come out with a box set featuring superior decos later down the line, I'm gonna be pissed. The paint doesn't even pick out the right areas. The exhaust ports on the shoulders barely make an impact, and why did they put silver on the underpants instead of the main torso? Like, shouldn't it be the other way around? It certainly would have helped the mechanical detail, which just looks like a whole heap of nothing. Honestly, this torso feels more like something out of the Prime Wars trilogy in its stylings than anything from the Unification era. Just unfocused, scrappy, and like they hollowed bits out for no reason. It's lovely to see the turquoise shine through, but it just feels like they put too much effort into the inner robot and left nothing for the rest. Arms also stink with the aforementioned lack of paint and the ridiculous fingers. I get they're supposed to be cannons, but did nobody realize this is Masterpiece Shockwave all over again? And all anyone's going to do with them is recreate the salute of that one guy from Danger 5? Full fingers too, not even Cyberverse Scout Dead End was that bad. Tolerances here are good, but posing can often be a pain with them constantly getting stuck on the back kibble. The wheel housing just sort of sits here, which would be fine if it folded out of the way, but I always find it annoyingly folding down and getting everything stuck. You can use the hinge to get get it further out of the way, but it just ends up looking stupid in that configuration. Maybe I'd be less critical of this aspect if it was the only bad part of this figure, but unfortunately this is a case where it's easier to explain what's right with it. Legitimately, the only part of this mode that doesn't suck is the legs. These are genuinely pretty cool with the way they fold up and flow with themselves. Yes, they're a smidge hollow from the back, but given the complexity of the design here, I don't see a feasible way of filling them out without something spring-loaded. Which isn't only impossible at the deluxe price range, but also, remember what happened to Make Toys Howling Meteor? Yeah, no thanks. But even then, the legs have problems, such as this peg constantly getting in the way. Why is this here? Is it so that you can peg the wheel onto other things? Why would anyone do this? Seriously, why? And secondly, no waist swivel. Why? Just why? Practically every Partsformer has figured out you can just have the hips plug into a port on the bottom. What's stopping you here? Would it cause issues in the vehicle mode? I mean, the vehicle mode already looks pretty shit. I don't see how much worse they could make it. Combined with how clunky the design looks overall, there's just no dynamicism in this thing. There's no pose you can get with this guy that looks like he's full of movement. There's always a subtle air of ricketiness that permeates the whole thing. And it's a real shame because the articulation that is here is toleranced fantastically. Every joint has perfect balance of tightness and freedom of movement. It all just works. The problem is when it's missing key articulation pieces and the ones that are here do nothing to bring the sculpt to life, there's really not much point to it. In robot mode and as a whole, this figure just reeks of compromise. I really hate to do this, but honestly, this genuinely feels like it suffers from the same ailment as Earthrise Cliffjumper. Yes, newer watchers might be confused, but back in the War for Cybertron era, I was kinda known for using this figure as a punching bag so much that I actively pulled myself back from even mentioning him so I could avoid it. But that figure was infected with the same lacking ideology as Micronus is. The idea that the conception of the figure cannot be compromised, but the base Transformers figure experience can be. There's no core class, so we have to put Micronus in a larger scale. Okay, make him a Voyager with a mech suit. No, we can't do that, he needs to be a deluxe. Okay, give him a simple vehicle mode so it doesn't cause issues. No, he has to be a unicycle. Okay then, make him a Partsformer with multiple parts so that you can do crazy things with him. No, we can't do that, bits have to transform normally. Okay then, at least gang mold him with the plastic so that you don't waste the sprue count. No, we can't do that because he has to be clear plastic despite none of the prior media being made of such. At every point, they would rather sacrifice the core experience of what a Transformer is over the idea they came up with. I don't think it's the designer's fault here. It genuinely seems like Kunihiro and co were thrown into a no-win situation. But from the get-go, this figure has given me the ick, and the more time I spend with it, the more I enter disgust. We all change at different parts of our lives. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. I can't pull the righteous fury I did for something like Zeta Superatron Mini, or heaven forbid Weijang Thunderleader. But make no mistake, this figure is of an appallingness of such a level. I don't like to throw figures under the bus when it's clear effort was put in. And I don't like to hate on everything without considering the other side, but without question, this is easily the worst figure from Age of the Primes I've come across, and even worse than anything that released in the Legacy trilogy. Not quite as bad as the worst of the War for Cybertron trilogy, but still, that's pretty bad. Micronus Prime isn't a special type of bad that can rewrite one's understanding of Transformers. Not something so absurd that it takes a full hour to dive into. He is simply bad in the simplest of forms. A flop that gets practically nothing right. He neither works as a Partsformer or a standard Transformer, neither in standalone or mech suit form, neither in form or function, neither in look or articulation. At every point, the core experience is undermined with jank and compromises, and the few positive points are all undercut with issues. His uniqueness only goes so far, and it's only unique because the concept was so completely impossible for the price point in the current year, and they had to cobble something together from the mandates placed on them. And sure, maybe you can conjure up something super creative like the Botbender would do. I've seen some truly brilliant combinations out of this thing, but I return to the same old analogy I used then. That's like saying a singular Lego brick is good because of its possibilities. This figure isn't a Lego brick. It's not a singular block that only exists to build something later. It's a $40 deluxe, and I expect more. I didn't want to hate this thing. The primes have ranged from a little boring to bloody fantastic prior to this. But in all honesty, this has kinda killed all momentum I had. After this figure, I'm genuinely not feeling this lineup anymore. And I think after I'm done, some are going to go to the sales page. It honestly baffles me that we have a case where this is worse than the Power of the Primes version. I usually much prefer a compromised figure that's creative over a solid but boring one. But this is just one of the worst official figures I've experienced in a very long time, making me far angrier than it has any right to. I don't like to just shit on absolutely everything in spite of how people perceive me. I always try to create a balance between positivity and negativity. But given the way the algorithm works, people will inevitably just add this to the pile of shitting I apparently do. But I needed to talk about this. I needed to get this off my chest. Consequences be damned. I have not been disgusted by a figure in a very long time. Especially not one that's bad in an absurd way, just a standard way. But hey, I guess it was always a matter of time. Nothing lasts forever. Eventually, shittiness catches up to you. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on the current Primes lineup below. Does Micronus deserve the criticism, or is he just an adorable bean who's done nothing wrong? Have the Primes interested you, or are you completely over them? And as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time!